So an atheist just lacks the belief.
Right.
That's it. When you try to subscribe and attach other, ideologies to it, then you're taking it away from what it actually is, a theist, a lack of belief without
But the
the
atheist
belief
lacks
of
a belief
God.
for a reason, though, right? Because they don't.
There's no evidence. I don't see evidence. When I see evidence, then I might change that belief. But until that evidence presents itself in a way that
Is that atheism?
Yeah, where's the evidence? I don't have the belief. And so if I told you there's a purple unicorn living in your heart right now, you'd say, well, where's the evidence? You wouldn't just take for just the fact that I said it, that it's there. So you just don't believe that it's there.
All right. I am an atheist. I define atheism as the positive position. There are no reasons, evidence, nor argument that indicate the existence of a God. If there is such a reason, then I will stop being an atheist. How can we know there is no evidence indicative of a God? Well, if you have a box, and you said there is a rabbit in the box, and your evidence for this is that the box weighs 2 pounds. The fact that the box weighs 2 pounds is not evidence of a rabbit because it can be equally explained by a lizard or a coffee mug or a weight or Legos, etc. The fact that this evidence works equally well for numerous other options means it is not evidence of a rabbit. The same thing applies to evidence of a God. If it works equally well for all non-God alternatives, then it's not evidence of a God.
The goal of physics, we believe, is to find an equation, perhaps no more than 1 inch long, which will allow us to unify all the forces of nature and allow us to read the mind of God.
Now, he is not necessarily talking about God in the way Christians, Muslims, and Jews mean when they say God, in a monotheistic way. But Kaku is referring to a very broad, general manner of speaking. Basically, ultimate reality. But notice how this physicist, when explaining physics, how natural and intuitive it was for him to convey the idea that there is a mind behind the forces of nature. There are reasons that explain why physicists use the description of a mind behind the equations that mathematically describe how the forces of nature operate. In 1978, Robert Jastrow, founding director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, wrote an article in the New York Times discussing how scientists react to discoveries that have theological consequences entitled, Have Astronomers Found God? In that article, he talked about how it was the discovery that the universe had a beginning through Einstein's equations and Hubble's observations of galaxies moving away from each other and the inability to discover a natural cause for the universe's beginning. Five years prior to Jastrow's article, Australian physicist Brandon Carter published an article about certain properties of the universe in 1973. These properties are referred to as dimensionless physical constants, the classic example being the proton-electron mass ratio. Divide the mass of a proton by the mass of an electron and the result is a number, just a plain number. If that number were any different than its current value, then life as we know it would not be able to exist. There are over 20 other dimensionless physical constants that are the parameters for life to exist and be sustained. Brandon Carter called it the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle suggests that the values of dimensionless physical constants were determined to have those values, so eventually someone would exist to discover their values. The universe seems specifically prepared for persons to study the universe. Dimensionless physical constants have their values independently of the fundamental forces. In other words, the fundamental forces did not cause the dimensionless physical constants to have the values that they currently have. The values of dimensionless physical constants appear to be determined but apart from natural forces. That determining property suggests decision-making. Decision-making is a property of a will. A will is a property of a mind. A mind is a property of personhood. An effect cannot be greater than its cause, so the cause of the universe is outside of time, space, and matter. There exists evidence that a person who was outside of time, I'll call that eternal, who was also outside of matter, I'll call that immaterial, or better yet, spirit, determined the parameters for life as we know it to eventually come into existence.
I think that there is probably a mental component to the universe, and you can call it God if you like. But if that is so, then there's no reason why that this mental component shouldn't have had a hand in setting the conditions.
There is evidence that an immaterial, eternal person is the cause for the universe. It's one thing to look at the evidence and remain unconvinced as to whether or not a personal God exists, but something altogether different to say that there is no evidence for such a cause. That statement would be made by someone who has not sufficiently thought through the mathematical consequences of the equations of physics, as well as the logical and philosophical consequences of observing the natural world.